You've seen the footage. A fighter jet screaming toward the back of an aircraft carrier at 150 miles per hour. The deck is moving. The ship is pitching in ocean swells. The landing area is roughly the size of a tennis court. The pilot has approximately 3.5 seconds from the moment the wheels touch the deck to either stop completely or go to full power and try again. And you probably watched it and thought that looked incredibly difficult. Dangerous even. The kind of thing that requires exceptional skill and nerves that most people simply do not have. Here is what you did not think about. That pilot does this in daylight, in calm weather, with a functioning aircraft, full visibility, and a stationary carrier in relatively calm seas. Now, remove the daylight. Put the carrier in the North Atlantic in winter. Add 30-foot swells that make the deck rise and fall 60 feet every few seconds. Reduce visibility to near zero in rain and fog. Make it 2 in the morning. Make the pilot's last meal 8 hours ago, and their last sleep 6 hours before that. Make the aircraft battle damaged with one hydraulic system partially failed. That is a routine night carrier landing in operational conditions. The United States Navy considers carrier landing the most dangerous routine aviation operation in the world. Not combat, not low-level attack runs, not aerial refueling and turbulence. The landing. The part that happens after the mission. The part that is supposed to be the safe conclusion to a dangerous flight. Statistically, more naval aviators have been killed or seriously injured in carrier landing accidents than in combat operations across multiple decades of Navy aviation history. And the engineering, the training, and the physics that allow pilots to survive it at all is one of the most extraordinary stories in the history of human performance under pressure. So what exactly makes a carrier landing so statistically lethal that it exceeds combat in terms of pilot casualties? Why does the carrier use an angled deck instead of landing down the center line of the ship? Why does the pilot apply full power at the moment of touchdown instead of reducing power like every other landing in aviation? What is the arresting wire, and why does catching it wrong kill pilots in ways that catching it right never does? Why does the carrier use a system of colored lights instead of verbal instructions to guide pilots onto the deck? And why do Navy pilots describe a successful night carrier landing not as a landing at all, but as a controlled crash? Here's the one that should reframe everything. The approach speed for a carrier landing is approximately 150 miles per hour. The stopping distance available on the carrier deck is approximately 320 feet. A commercial airliner landing at 150 miles per hour on a runway needs approximately 5,000 feet to stop. The carrier accomplishes in 320 feet what a runway needs 5,000 feet to do. This makes carrier landing physics unusually dangerous. The physics of decelerating from 150 miles per hour to zero in 320 feet generates forces on the aircraft and pilot that are at the absolute limit of what both can structurally survive. That deceleration has to happen correctly every single time in conditions that are never the same twice on a deck that is moving in 3 dimensions simultaneously. Most people who watch carrier landing footage assume the primary challenge is accuracy, hitting a small target moving through the ocean. The pilot needs to be precise enough to put the aircraft in exactly the right spot on the deck. The danger is missing the deck entirely, landing short in the water or long off the end of the ship. The skill is marksmanship. The danger is a miss. That assumption captures maybe 20% of the actual problem. Accuracy matters. But accuracy is achievable with training and technology. The systems that guide a pilot onto the carrier deck, the optical landing system, the instrument landing system, and the approach controllers are sophisticated enough that a competent pilot in good conditions can hit the target consistently. Accuracy is the solved part of the problem. The unsolved part, the part that makes carrier landing statistically more dangerous than combat, is what happens in the 3.5 seconds after the wheels touch the deck. The deceleration forces, the arresting wire engagement, the simultaneous requirement to be fully committed to stop and fully prepared to go to full power and fly away. The moving deck, the darkness, the fatigue, the mechanical systems operating at the absolute edge of their design envelope every single time. The danger is not missing the carrier. The danger is what the carrier does to the aircraft and pilot when they hit it correctly. Here's what's actually happening in those 3.5 seconds. The pilot crosses the carrier's stern at approximately 150 miles per hour, 20 feet above the deck. The aircraft's tailhook, a steel hook extending from the rear of the fuselage, is lowered and trailing behind the aircraft. The deck has 4 arresting wires stretched across it at intervals of approximately 40 feet. The wires are steel cables approximately 1.25 inches in diameter, tensioned to specific loads by hydraulic arresting engines below the deck. The target wire is the 3rd wire. Catching the 1st wire means the approach was too low. Catching the 4th wire means the approach was too high. Missing all 4 wires, called a bolter, means the aircraft must immediately go to full power and fly off the end of the deck for another attempt. When the tailhook catches a wire, the deceleration begins. The wire pays out from the arresting engine at a controlled rate, absorbing the aircraft's kinetic energy hydraulically. The deceleration force on the aircraft peaks at approximately 4 to 5 G, that is 4 to 5 times the force of gravity, sustained for approximately 2 seconds. The pilot, already braced for impact, is thrown forward against their harness with a force equivalent to 4 times their body weight. The aircraft decelerates from 150 miles per hour to 0 in approximately 320 feet and 2 seconds. But here's where it gets crazy. At the moment the wheels touch the deck, the pilot does not reduce power. They go to full power, maximum thrust, simultaneously with touchdown. This is called a touch and go, or more accurately, a trap with a bolter contingency. The reason is brutally simple. If the tailhook misses all 4 wires, the pilot has approximately 320 feet of remaining deck to accelerate back to flying speed before running off the end of the ship into the ocean. At idle power, that acceleration is impossible. At full power, it is barely possible. The pilot cannot wait to see if the hook caught before applying power. By the time they know, it is too late to accelerate. So the pilot lands at full power, decelerates at 4 to 5 Gs if the hook catches, and simultaneously maintains the thrust needed to fly off the end of the ship if it does not. The arresting wire and the engine are working against each other for 2 seconds. The wire wins if the hook caught. The engine wins if it did not. The pilot is committed to both outcomes simultaneously and cannot choose between them until the aircraft has already stopped or is already flying. This is the part everyone misses. A carrier landing is not a landing followed by a decision. It is a simultaneous commitment to 2 mutually exclusive outcomes, with the physics deciding which one occurs. Now add the deck motion. The carrier is not stationary. In any sea state above flat calm, the ship is pitching, rotating bow up and bow down, rolling, rotating side to side, and heaving, moving vertically up and down. In moderate North Atlantic conditions, the deck can be moving vertically at rates of 10 to 15 feet per second. The pilot is approaching at 150 miles per hour, descending at approximately 700 feet per minute, aiming for a deck that may be rising or falling at 900 feet per minute at the moment of touchdown. If the deck is rising as the aircraft arrives, the effective sink rate of the aircraft relative to the deck is reduced. The landing is softer than expected. The hook may skip over the wires. If the deck is falling as the aircraft arrives, the effective sink rate relative to the deck increases dramatically. The aircraft hits the deck harder than expected. The landing gear absorbs forces it was not designed for. The hook may catch a wire at an angle that causes it to skip or break. The structural loads on the aircraft at the moment of touchdown vary by factors of 2 or 3, depending on deck motion, that the pilot cannot fully predict or control. The optical landing system, called the meatball, a gyroscopically stabilized light system that shows the pilot their position on the glide slope, compensates for ship pitch by stabilizing the reference beam against the ship's motion, but it cannot compensate for heave. The vertical motion of the deck is not reflected in the glide slope reference. The pilot sees a correct glide slope indication and still hits a deck that is moving vertically at 15 feet per second. The system is correct, the physics is indifferent. At night, the problem compounds in ways that are difficult to fully convey. The human visual system uses multiple cues to judge distance, altitude, and closure rate, including ground texture, peripheral motion, horizon reference, and depth perception from binocular vision. At night, over the ocean, while approaching a carrier, all of those cues are absent or degraded. The ocean surface provides no texture reference. The horizon is invisible. The carrier lights provide reference points, but not the rich visual environment the brain uses to judge spatial relationships automatically during daylight approaches. The pilot is flying on instruments, on the meatball, and on a set of learned responses that must override the brain's instinctive spatial judgments, which are wrong in this environment, fast enough to make corrections at 150 miles per hour. The Navy's own data shows that night carrier landing accident rates are approximately 3 times higher than day landing accident rates. The darkness does not change the physics. It removes the sensory information the pilot needs to manage the physics in real time. Here's what the physics means in actual numbers. The peak deceleration force during a carrier-arrested landing is approximately 4 to 5 G, sustained for 2 seconds. The FA-18 Super Hornet weighs approximately 51,000 pounds fully loaded. At 4 G deceleration, the arresting wire and its associated hardware must absorb approximately 204,000 pounds of force, 102 tons, in 2 seconds. The arresting engine below the deck pays out approximately 340 feet of wire during that deceleration, absorbing the aircraft's kinetic energy hydraulically and converting it to heat in the hydraulic fluid. The tailhook on an FA-18 must withstand a peak load of approximately 500,000 pounds, 250 tons, at the moment of wire engagement. It is a forged steel component approximately 6 feet long and 4 inches in diameter at its thickest point. It is inspected after every arrested landing for cracks, deformation, and wear. It is replaced on a scheduled cycle regardless of visible condition, because the cumulative fatigue loading from repeated arrested landings degrades the metal at the microscopic level in ways that visual inspection cannot detect. The carrier deck itself absorbs approximately 20 million foot-pounds of kinetic energy per arrested landing. Across a typical deployment of several thousand arrested landings, the arresting gear system absorbs energy equivalent to detonating several tons of high explosive, distributed across thousands of individual events. The system is designed, maintained, and replaced on cycles that account for this cumulative loading. Carrier aviation did not begin with arrested landings. It began with a problem that seemed impossible to solve. The first aircraft to land on a moving ship did so in 1917, when Squadron Commander Edwin Dunning landed a Sopwith pup on the deck of HMS Furious while the ship steamed into the wind at 26 knots. There were no arresting wires. Dunning's colleagues grabbed the aircraft by ropes attached to the wings to stop it before it went over the side. Dunning made 2 successful landings using this method. On his 3rd attempt, the engine stalled, the aircraft went over the side, and Dunning drowned before he could be rescued. The problem of stopping an aircraft on a ship deck had claimed its first victim. Early arresting systems used longitudinal wires running along the length of the deck that engaged hooks on the aircraft's landing gear and dragged sandbags to absorb energy. They were unreliable, inconsistent, and frequently caused the aircraft to veer off the deck centerline during deceleration. Transverse wires running across the deck and the system used today were adopted in the 1920s and proved dramatically more effective at stopping the aircraft in a straight line. The angled deck, the defining feature of modern carrier design, was not part of original carrier design. Early carriers had straight decks, meaning the landing area was directly aligned with the bow. A bolter on a straight deck meant the aircraft ran off the bow into the ocean. There was no second chance. The angled deck was developed by the British Royal Navy in the early 1950s and adopted by the United States Navy in 1952. It rotated the landing area approximately 9 degrees off the ship's centerline. A bolter on an angled deck means the aircraft flies off into open air beside the ship, not into the bow or into aircraft parked forward. The pilot can go around and try again. The angled deck converted a fatal bolter into a recoverable one. It is one of the most important safety innovations in the history of carrier aviation, and it costs nothing except the engineering insight to rotate the landing area. The optical landing system, known as the meatball, replaced the landing signal officers who previously used paddles to signal pilots during approach. The landing signal officers remain, but their role shifted from primary guidance to monitoring and override. The optical system provides a continuous, objective glide slope reference that is not subject to the communication delays and interpretation errors of paddle signals. It was developed in the 1950s and has been continuously refined since. The current system, the Fresnel Lens Optical Landing System, uses a gyroscopically stabilized lens array that maintains a fixed glide slope reference regardless of ship pitch, providing the pilot with an accurate reference even as the ship moves beneath the system. You have been surrounded by the physics and engineering of carrier landing your entire life without recognizing it. The hydraulic arresting system that stops a 51,000-pound aircraft in 320 feet uses the same energy absorption principle as the hydraulic buffers at the end of subway and train lines. When a train overshoots its stop, hydraulic buffers absorb the kinetic energy and bring the train to a controlled stop. The physics of converting kinetic energy to heat in hydraulic fluid is identical. The scale is different, but the principle is the same. The touch-and-go procedure, applying full power at touchdown to maintain the option of flying away, is the same logic as the go-around procedure used by commercial airline pilots when an approach is unstable. Every commercial pilot is trained to apply full power and fly away from a bad approach, rather than commit to a landing that may not be safe. The carrier pilot does this simultaneously with landing rather than instead of landing, but the underlying decision logic, maintain the option to fly away until the last possible moment, is identical. The tailhook that catches the arresting wire is the same principle as the arresting hooks used on short runway military airfields, called SATS, Short Airfield for Tactical Support, where land-based aircraft use arresting wires to stop in distances shorter than a normal runway allows. The same hook, the same wire, the same hydraulic arresting engine operates on land instead of at sea. The carrier system and the land-based system are identical in engineering. The carrier adds the moving deck. The meatball optical landing system uses a gyroscopically stabilized reference, a spinning mass that maintains its orientation regardless of the ship's motion, to provide a fixed glide slope reference on a moving platform. The same gyroscopic stabilization principle is used in camera stabilizers, in ship-mounted gun systems that maintain aim regardless of ship motion, and in the image stabilization systems in modern cameras and smartphones. The physics of a spinning mass resisting changes to its orientation is identical whether it is stabilizing a camera lens or a carrier landing reference light. The fatigue loading analysis that determines when a tailhook must be replaced, counting cumulative stress cycles rather than waiting for visible failure, is the same engineering methodology used to determine maintenance intervals for commercial aircraft, bridges, and industrial machinery. Metal fatigue is invisible until it causes catastrophic failure. Cycle counting and replacement before the failure threshold is reached is the engineering solution. The tailhook and the commercial aircraft wing spar are managed by identical fatigue life methodologies. Now for the honest part, because it is significant, the Navy's carrier aviation accident rate has improved dramatically over the decades. In the early years of carrier aviation, accident rates were so high that the statistical expectation for a naval aviator completing a full career was not survival. The combination of improved aircraft reliability, better training, better optical landing systems, better weather forecasting, and better crew resource management has reduced the accident rate by orders of magnitude from its historical peak. But it has not reached zero. The physics that makes carrier landing dangerous has not changed. The deck still moves. The deceleration forces remain at the structural limit of the aircraft. the night environment still removes the visual cues the human brain needs to judge spatial relationships accurately. The fatigue of long missions still degrades the fine motor control and decision-making speed that carrier landing demands. The Navy accepts this risk because the alternative, not having carrier aviation, is a strategic capability loss that the military considers unacceptable. The carrier and its aircraft are the most powerful conventional military instrument the United States possesses. The danger of operating it is the price of having it. That trade-off is made explicitly and deliberately by people who understand the statistics. The pilots who fly carrier aviation know the statistics. They choose the assignment anyway. That choice deserves more than the 3 seconds of screen time the movies give it. So here's where you actually land. You came in thinking carrier landing was dangerous because it required hitting a small target on a moving ship. What is actually happening is a simultaneous commitment to two mutually exclusive outcomes: stopping and flying, resolved by physics in 2 seconds, on a deck, moving vertically at 15 feet per second, at night, in conditions that remove every visual reference the human brain uses to judge spatial relationships, after a mission that may have lasted 8 hours, generating deceleration forces of 4 to 5 G-forces, that the aircraft was designed to survive exactly as many times as its fatigue life allows, and not one more. The landing is not the safe conclusion to a dangerous mission. The landing is the most dangerous part of the mission. The combat is the part in between two carrier landings. And the pilots who do this routinely, in all-weather day and night for months at a time on deployment, are not doing something that looks dangerous. They are doing something that is dangerous, that the statistics confirm is dangerous, and that they have trained for thousands of hours to survive. The 3.5 seconds from wheels on deck to full stop is not a landing. It is a controlled application of physics at the absolute limit of what an aircraft, a wire, a hydraulic system, and a human body can simultaneously survive. Every time. Without exception. Because the mission requires it. And if you think the physics of stopping a fighter jet on a carrier deck is at the limit of what engineering can achieve, wait until you find out what happens when that same carrier needs to launch that aircraft in the opposite direction in under 3 seconds. The electromagnetic catapult system that accelerates 50,000 pounds of aircraft from 0 to 165 miles per hour in 300 feet is solving a physics problem so extreme that the solution required reinventing how the entire ship generates and stores electricity. The engineering behind that solution is stranger than anything in this video.